Welcome to the Bioethics Babe podcast, where we examine the tough questions in human flourishing in light of science, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Arena Grosso-Agnew. Now let's dive in. What if feminism actually left women more vulnerable in one of the most important moments of their lives? Today, we're talking about birth. Not just the experience, but how it's changed. Because modern medicine tells us birth has never been safer. And yet, more and more women are walking away feeling traumatized, disempowered, and unheard. So what happened? Did something go wrong in the system, or did something deeper shift in how we understand women's bodies in the first place? After a birth experience that almost wasn't a live delivery, today's guest says the biggest lesson wasn't about control, it was about surrender. And that may be exactly what modern feminism got wrong. I'm joined today by Leah Jacobson, founder of the Guiding Star Project and the author of Wholistic Feminism. What if true empowerment isn't about mastering or overriding the female body, but understanding it, working with it, and even trusting it? That is the vision behind what she calls holistic feminism, a framework that does not separate women from their biology, but sees the female body as something meaningful, integrated, and worth honoring. So here's the question most people never think to ask. Did feminism fail women in birth? Leah, welcome to Bioethics, babe.
Thanks so much for letting me come and talk with you about this, Arena. This is fun.
It's wonderful to have you on, and it's going to be a great episode. So Leah, for those who are new to your work, what first led you into women's health and advocacy?
Great question. I've been doing this now for a long time. It's already been over 2 decades. And when I reflect back on what really got me fired up, what really started to stir my heart is my time as a campus minister. I worked for the Diocese of Duluth, Minnesota in the Newman House at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And as the Catholic campus minister, I was newly married and having babies and starting to kind of figure out what it meant to be living fully in my female body as a Catholic woman. And it was the conversations with my students, with college-age women, recognizing the disconnect between their fertility, the disconnect between how things worked. Breastfeeding was really something that was strange. A lot of female students felt very uncomfortable seeing me breastfeed. And it started to get things really stirring in my brain about, isn't this a feminist revolution? Aren't we empowered women? Don't we believe in our bodies? Are we full of shame? And so it just really cascaded and got me looking at these issues more deeply. So that's really what got it started, was college-age women, working with them, and me becoming a mother myself.
And you are a mother of 8, have experienced a range of births. What did those experiences teach you about the system women are entering?
Yeah, I am a mother of 8, and my 8th really is pretty recent. She's only 4 months old right now, and it's probably the most different of all the births I've had. I have had every type of birth imaginable. I think the only birth I haven't had yet, spoiler alert, is a VBAC. So I've had the C-section, I've had the home birth, I've had the unmedicated hospital birth, I've had the induced hospital delivery. And really what I've learned in all of these births is there are so many unique circumstances that lead us to the birth outcomes that we end up having. There's a lot that we can't control in welcoming our babies, but there are things that we absolutely can influence as well. And so really that's what it's taught me about this system, is that we have to be advocates for ourselves, and that we as women coming in have to absolutely understand and be prepared for the ideal outcome and how to set the circumstances for that.
Mm-hmm. You've spoken openly about your most recent birth, which was especially challenging. Can you take us into that moment? What happened, and how did your intuition play a role in what followed?
Yeah, this last birth, baby number 8, I'm a little older now than I was with my first deliveries. It's actually 22 years since my first birth to my last birth. My most recent birth, I actually don't know if it's my last birth, but I'm suspecting it might be. I'm a little 44 years old now, and I felt something different. This one felt like it was always going to be a little bit different. Having had the home birth, having had the natural birth, this one, the entire process felt a little bit different. And so I was making decisions that didn't really make sense to myself as I was going through my care. I chose to do a hospital delivery, which maybe wasn't what I would have wanted, but yet it felt like that's where I should be. I chose to work with an OBGYN, which in the past I've really loved working with family practice doctors and midwives. Everything that I was doing wasn't really even making sense to myself. And then when it came to the actual labor and delivery, it all made sense. This baby had some circumstances that were just a little bit more nuanced. They were a little bit more dangerous. What ended up happening is that she had a very long, giant cord, is really the term for it. The medical term is actually a
Wow.
giant umbilical cord. It was about 7 feet long with two true knots, and it prolapsed. And so we experienced emergency birth complication of a prolapsed cord that resulted in a scary run down the hallway to the operating room where she had barely an APGAR of 2. She was a 1 plus on her APGAR score when she was delivered. And it was roughly only 7 to 10 minutes from the point where the prolapse occurred in the upstairs delivery room to the point where we were in the basement OR room. And she was still almost gone. And so it's that very real reality. This is a reality that women are faced with all the time, that really is that precipice of life and death. It's beautiful, it's sacred, but people die and it happens. And so that realization for me, and sitting with that these last 4 months as somebody who has advocated for physiologic birth over and over again, it's been something I've really wrestled and weighed, and it's given me a really important and profound new vantage point to reflect upon.
Wow, I mean, that just sent chills down my back. In your writing, you describe this as the birth you didn't want, but the one your daughter needed. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, again, it was that I don't want to have a C-section. I don't want to even have a hospital birth. Like, I've had beautiful, lovely home births where you give birth in the tub and you get out and you crawl into your bed and they tuck the baby in beside you and you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning with your other children around you. And it's just beautiful. It looks like something off of Instagram. I've had those deliveries. That's the birth I would want. But as I was preparing for this, there was this motherly, maternal intuition the entire time where I just didn't feel certain that I would be bringing a baby home. Whatever it was, something in me felt unsure that this baby was going to make it. And so I had this impending sense of doom for months leading up to this delivery. And so when it finally happened in the delivery room, when we finally had the cord prolapse, when my OBGYN, when he locked eyes with me, we made eye contact, I knew what was happening. I knew we're rushing off to an emergency C-section. Ready, I was fully prepared. I actually felt like a wave of relief because I knew something was going to happen. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. And so when it finally happened, I've been in the birth world long enough. I know the severity of this complication. I know the process. I know what needs to happen. I know, how to push the head back off the cord. I know how to elevate the hips. I felt a sense of relief because I also knew her chances for survival were very good in the setting that we were in. The decisions that I had made leading up to it put her in a very good position for survival. And so I didn't want that kind of birth, but I have to just be honest and say, had I been at home or had I been in a birth center and this complication had happened, her chances for survival would have been greatly reduced. So I didn't want this birth, but she absolutely needed it.
Wow. Well, that really resonates with me. We only have one so far. God willing, we'll have more. But I had a very difficult birth and delivery. It wasn't the birth and delivery I wanted, but it was the one that our son needed. And even though we prepared for a natural birth and we started off at the birth center, had to end up at the hospital and get a C-section. Totally not what I wanted, but it was what he needed. So we kind of have to adjust and be flexible with what is the reality of the situation,
Yeah.
even as we desire for things to be differently. We just have to go along with it as well. So I totally understand that. So that brings up the point of surrender, something we don't often hear in modern birth conversations. What did surrender look like in that moment for you, and why was it necessary?
For me in that moment, like I said, it was pure relief. Having done this 8 times and knowing something was off, just having that deep internal maternal instinct, knowing something was off, I was waiting for a moment of surrender. Previously in my birth, surrender has looked more like surrendering to transitions, surrendering to the final pains of letting your body push and do what it needs to do and not tightening up and not holding back, and just not getting in the way of the natural process. Previously, that's what surrender has always looked like to me. It was surrendering to the waves. It was surrendering to the contractions. It was trusting that my body knew what to do. And in this birth surrender felt very different because it was truly that moment of I put my life into the hands of these medical personnel around me. I surrender to their medical expertise. I surrender to the scalpel. I surrender to the anesthesia. I'm not fighting this. I'm not doubting it. I'm prepared for this moment. And that's what my surrender looked like in that moment was this is the birth that needs to happen. And
Hmm.
here we go.
And as you mentioned that this birth was almost not a live delivery. How did that reality change the way you understand both risk and trust in birth?
You read about those those stories, those terrible birth complications that end in a baby dying. You read about it and your heart just as a mother, you just like it just hurts so much. But in that moment when it's your baby, it's very different. Honestly, for the last 4 months, I kind of keep poking her and I kind of, I say to her every couple of days, like, I'm really glad you're alive. I'm glad you're here. That wasn't something I ever thought about with my other children. I just sort of took for granted, like, of course you're alive. Like, I did 9 months with you on the inside. I earned you. I earned your life. Like, you should be alive. Of course, I earned these smiles. It's so cute. And all of this feels like pure gift. It just feels pure gift when you really stand at that precipice and understand that it doesn't always come out this way. It doesn't always get the happy ending. And, sometimes these traumatic births also result in injuries. Sometimes they result in things not being normal for your baby for the rest of your life. And so it's all part of that surrender just extending. It's not just the birth that you surrender to and the labor and the delivery. It's the surrender of who is this person in my life and how am I called to care for them and mother them for their life. And that's a lot of surrender too. Um,
Mhm. Was
but
there a
yeah,
specific point where you realized this isn't
yeah.
just my story? This is something bigger happening to women more broadly.
I've had an awareness of the statistics surrounding birth for many years. Um, it was actually strange for me to feel like I had entered into a statistic. Like I actually, had kind of thought myself outside of the statistics in some way, the negative statistics, the C-section statistics. We know roughly 1 in 3 women have a C-section. I'm like, well, that's not me. I don't have C-sections. Well, I do. I do have C-sections. Um, so I knew that this was more the norm of birth. This is happening broadly. This is happening to women all over the country all the time. It was just weird for me to accept that I'm here. This is me too. And now I also have to deal with the ramifications of the physical trauma, the emotional trauma, the fear. And so now, getting to walk through it as myself, it's different because I've always been the helper, the lactation consultant, the birth advocate. I've always been the helper walking women through it. And now I am desperately grabbing the hands of helpers all around me and saying, help me through this. This is hard.
Well, you've been leading Guiding Star, as you said, for years and in this world for many decades. How did this recent birth experience change or sharpen your understanding of what women actually need?
I think we've been pretty good with Guiding Star on forecasting what these types of needs are for women when they come out of traumatic births like this. We've done a lot of work around birth trauma and advocacy and making sure that women have the village they need. If anything, this really reinforced the need for this everywhere. I'm so blessed that I have the network that I do because following this delivery, I didn't have to cook a meal for 2 months. The meal train showed up, the DoorDash showed up. And so I was just really grateful when I thought about if I didn't have my network, if I didn't have my Guiding Star people, my friends, the people I've made throughout the years, this would have been incredibly isolating.
Mhm. It really does take a village, and I think we can't underestimate the importance of community and support.
Absolutely.
The Guiding Star Project talks about integrated women's health care. What does that actually mean in practice, and how is it different from the fragmented care most women experience today?
Yeah, like I mentioned, this passion really came when I was working as a campus minister. And what I was seeing and witnessing in young women, especially as they were preparing for marriage, it was just an interesting vantage point at that point in women's lives, between the ages of 18 and 28, roughly those marrying years, where they're starting to think for the very first time about family and about the implications of fertility and their female bodies. And they're starting to think about, oh, you know, my ovulation actually might lead to pregnancy and delivery and then breastfeeding. And it was just clear that these ideas had never been connected holistically in their mind and in their healthcare, quite frankly. The decisions that they had been led to make maybe as teenagers were completely disconnected from later on how it might affect their life decisions about the family they want, the life they want later. And so I got really passionate when I saw that fragmentation in care for myself, but also for my students. And I realized that the hyper specialization of women's healthcare in many ways has led women to think that there's a disconnect, that the actions in one arena or area don't have implications later or on other areas. So, for instance, just an example of just how this kind of mindset has worked with young women, we tend to not recognize, that when young women are put on birth control at 14 years old, that it might be causing some aging or potential damage to her cervical crypts and her mucus production that maybe later will affect her ability to get pregnant. And so there's this disconnect of, I want this right now. How's it going to affect me later? And we put them in two different specialties then. Then we have this hyper specialized area of fertility medicine, of artificial reproductive technologies, where then maybe we're like, well, this is a fertility problem. So it's just getting bounced around, not having that one place where you naturally go for your entire health cycle, for your entire women's health reproductive cycle. It's just really evident that we don't do that for women. We don't do that. Um,
And I think that this is where the work that you do with the Guiding Star Project is so important. Can you talk about the mission and how you actually do address these things and help to bring a holistic view of the female body and fertility together?
Yeah, so our goal at Guiding Star Center is because we want to help women connect the dots. We want to help them see that everything that you do here affects this other area of your healthcare. We want them in the building by the time they're 9 years old. 9 years old is our target age that we want to have a relationship with a young woman. We want her to attend our cycle show. We want her to come and learn about her fertility and her beautiful body, her menstruation, prior to it happening, so that her first concepts, her first ideas of herself, the framework of her body, me as a woman, as a female person, that my framework is positive. And so, really, the messaging of our very first introductory program is, I can only protect what I value and respect. And it's her helping to see that fertility is a sign of health. Pregnancy is a sign of health. It takes a healthy body to get pregnant. It's a good accomplishment of your body. Breastfeeding is a sign of health. All these things are good, healthy things. And so that's really, Guiding Star, the arc of our services is, it's all based upon this idea that this is good and should not be suppressed. We're not going to
Mhm.
suppress a natural, healthy function of your body. Um, for no good reason. There are really no good reasons for us to shut down beautiful, healthy fertility in young women. And that's what Guiding Star feels very strongly about. We do it from our fertility education. We have our core pillars of natural family planning and fertility education. Then we have childbirth education and support. And then we have postpartum care with lactation and then family life support. So those are really the pillars of our education programs and also our services. So we're at the point now where we're beginning to open our first birthing centers where we can actually do the delivery of our babies right on site. So my dream, we're still a little bit young yet to do this, but my dream is that 9-year-old girl who came in for her first cycle show and came back for her first pap smear and learned fertility awareness before she got married and is pregnant. And then we deliver her baby and then she stays with us for her breastfeeding support and postpartum care. And we stay with her the entire, length of her fertile years and her family. And then when she hits her perimenopause, she comes back for her hormone supplements. And then when she goes through menopause, she comes back for her a well woman care for the rest of her life. We want to be that for women.
I think that's a beautiful vision, and you're actually implementing it. So, this is why your work is so important, and I'm a big fan of it. Women are told that modern obstetrics is the safest it's ever been. So, how do you reconcile experiences like yours?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think we know it's not. the safest it's ever been. We know that modern obstetrics, actually, there are a lot of increased risks. We know just in labor and delivery that as soon as we begin that cascade of interventions, our negative outcomes begin to increase. We have C-section rates in our country. I mentioned it earlier, roughly 1 in 3. It's actually a little bit higher in many areas of the country. C-sections have a lot of negative implications for women's health long term. So the safety, I think, is sometimes used as um, not a bullying tactic, but it is almost a paternalism in healthcare of we know what's best for you. Distrust, in a sense, your instincts. Your body probably can't do this. The safest thing to do is come here to the hospital to do this. When in reality, that's not the case. A birth center is an absolutely appropriate place for the majority of low risk pregnancies. They have incredibly good outcomes. They have safer outcomes when we look at statistically, when we look at outcomes for C-section, it's much lower. It's roughly 5 to 10% versus hospitals. We see breastfeeding rates increase when we're in a more natural birth setting. We see a lot of positive outcomes that are, in a sense, safer for women psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically, outside of the modern obstetrical system.
Mhm. And since you've had diverse birth experiences, and you said you've had the home birth, you've had the hospital birth, you've had the C-section, etc. How would you advise women in making decisions about how to go and choosing which route, insofar as they're able to? Obviously, things can change as the reality changes of their birth and delivery. But how would you recommend that? Because obviously, you see that the C-sections may be necessary, but they can also be pushed onto women. So, can you talk a little bit about that and helping women and couples to discern the proper way for them to move forward with a birth plan?
Yeah, I think birth preparation is one of the most underutilized tools that we have in our country. And in the sense of not being prepared for hospital policy. I've attended several birth classes, and I can tell you that many of them are just, this is what you're going to do when you come into our system. This is how we handle birth. And these are the medications that are available to you. And this is what you're expected to do in our system. That's a typical birth prep class. Uh, it's important to get an independent sort of education on physiological birth. What is actually happening in the birth process? How should my body be progressing? What are signs of trouble? What are normal markers? What's a normal birth experience? Because a lot of fear can come into play when we experience pain. We're not prepared for it, maybe. And when it happens, we begin to just automatically fear, I'm in danger. And there's a difference between productive, safe, healthy pain and damaging, disease, destructive pain. There's a difference. And for the ability for us to distinguish that in birth is critical right now. So I think that for women preparing, seeing, witnessing, watching as many births as possible is really helpful.
Do you think that something is missing in how modern medicine understands intuition, maternal awareness, or the non clinical aspects of birth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that modern medicine, if we've become a bit reliant on the test strip, on the monitor. We like to watch the heart rate the entire time. It gives us a sense of peace that this is fine and good. And in my last birth, this is a really interesting piece of it is that my baby, she was being monitored. We were in a hospital setting. Her strips were perfect. We had 12 plus hours of absolutely perfect strips. She handled every contraction beautifully. Everything looked perfect. And the nurses and the doctor even commented, wow, she's really happy in there. She's doing really well. She's really happy in there. And when they said that, something inside of me just was like, I don't, I don't think she is. Something in me just felt like, no, she's not. I could tell something felt weird. And looking back on it, what I think she was tied up in her cord. She wasn't moving very well. Her movements were very weird, kind of jerky. She was tied up in her giant 7 foot long cord, and there was no imaging that could show us that. We had dozens of ultrasounds with this birth. because I was so high risk, being old and being, having had so many babies. They did ultrasounds every week. We did biophysical profiles every week for the last 8 weeks leading up to her delivery. Nothing indicated that there was a problem, but I knew there was a problem. And so, in that sense, it missed the problem, which is not as common. What happens more commonly, this over reliance on the tests, on the numbers, is that we create problems. We see that baby that's just a little bit drowsy and fails a biophysical profile because they don't move enough. They don't kick enough in the time frame that they're supposed to. And then all of a sudden, they're put on a time clock and they're put on extra monitoring. And so there is something to maternal intuition that we have to pause and ask mom, what do you think? Is baby okay right now? How are you feeling right now? Like, there's a connection there that cannot be measured.
What are the most common interventions in hospital births today, and which ones concern you the most?
I think the one that's most concerning to me because of its commonplace, its popularity, is really inductions, labor inductions. Many women are being induced today. Some numbers put it as high as, 30 to 35% of women. So 1 in 3 women are having their labors induced, which has greatly increased since the time when we were born. In the 80s, it's increased. Some numbers say it's even tripled since the 80s, the rate of inductions. And the reason that stat is so concerning is that it's the very first in what we call this cascade of interventions. That as soon as you've had your induction, very likely you're going to have your epidural at a certain point. And then, with limited mobility, we see oftentimes labor stalling, and then we see the C-sections. And so there's actually a correlation with induction to C-section that it's 2 times higher. If you've had an induction, your chance for a C-section doubles. So that's concerning. And those are the things I was weighing, in my delivery, where I know these risks are associated. I know these numbers are there. And I also know that it's not just the delivery. It goes on to affect you afterwards. Your breastfeeding rate for success actually decreases when you've had a C-section for a number of reasons. So those are the weird sort of moments that we kind of weigh as women, where we're like, I think I need this thing. I think I need this thing to help me right now. But how is it going to affect me in the long run? Am I going to feel okay afterwards? And it's a balance. We're trying to navigate this system where, for the ease of the provider, sometimes for the ease of the policy, they want us to do a certain thing. And it maybe is going against our instincts and maybe going against what we even know statistically to be good for us. But it's still the policy of the hospital. It's still the practice that, if you've been in labor for 24 hours with your water broken, we got to do that. We got to get this baby out. There's things that there's gray area in birth that sometimes is disastrous and sometimes is totally fine. And do we want to really play those margins as moms with our babies' lives is the question.
Mhm. And I think that this kind of education is so important for women, for couples, as you said, to figure out beforehand so that they're not waiting until they're in an emergency situation to make this decision, but to know when is it normal progression of a birth, and that you can push off any interventions, and when is it okay, this is serious and we actually do need to do these types of things and accept the risks of those interventions for the sake of a mom and baby. So those are very important things to consider, but it does take some education beforehand and preparation as well.
I would just add on to that, Arena, that it really is the people you're surrounding yourself in birth with. I think maybe that is the biggest difference between when we see like a home birth, a birth center birth versus a hospital birth. What is the level of education in natural, normal, physiological birth? I'll never forget my fourth baby when I had them at the hospital. Actually, this is baby number 5. I can't even keep them straight at this point. Number 4 was at home. Number 5 was at the hospital. And I remember it was a natural water birth. And the nurse wrote me the nicest letter afterwards. I've never received a letter from a labor and delivery nurse, but she sent me a long letter and said I had never seen a natural birth. And it was a water birth. And she said it was so beautiful and it was so peaceful. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to be in the room with you during that time. And she didn't do a thing really. I mean, she kind of just sat in the corner and watched, but she was there. I knew she had to be there. And so recognizing that the people in the room are incredibly important and what they put onto the mother about the situation. If they are concerned, if they are stressed, if they think that there is a problem happening, a laboring woman is incredibly sensitive to all of this and absorbs it and internalizes it. And it really does affect the direction of the delivery.
Mhm. What we learned in our birthing classes is that the husband should kind of keep these people at bay, right? And just kind of
Yes.
be the doorkeeper, so that when the wife is in labor and delivery, she's not absorbing all of these emotions from various people, but that he can kind of be the doorkeeper as well, as she's in the
I
midst
think
of this.
I think that's the one piece of advice I gave to your husband when I found out you were pregnant. I said, read this book. It's chapter 8. It's Guardian of the Birth Space. You are now the guardian of the birth space. That's incredibly important. And that took us, it was, baby number 3, I think, before my husband figured out his role in the birth, in the labor and delivery process as a medical provider. He works in healthcare. And so he's very comfortable in, healthcare settings, but he also took on the role of, well, I should be doing something. I'm a healthcare provider. And what we learned by baby number 3 is that your job is to keep the lights dark and the people out. And that's when it goes well.
Yes, and one of the things that we learned in the birth class is that a lot of the times the husbands, the fathers of the child are pushed off to the side, and they're kind of left not knowing what to do, whereas they are the biggest assets to whether that birth is going to be successful for his wife, just because they can help with the support as opposed to being reactive to whatever the medical system is saying. They can be the ones being proactive and helping to make those decisions with their wives as they're going through this. So it's really important that this piece is put together beforehand, so that the couple knows what to expect, and they have a plan A and a plan B. Hey, this is our ideal birth, and if things don't go that way, this is our plan B. And having that preparation is super important. And I think that kind of education beforehand is going to lead to more beautiful births that more of the births that people want, as opposed to just being pulled into whatever birth the hospital wants you to have.
I think we just have to recognize that, rightfully so, there's a little bit more fear in a hospital setting of what can go wrong because they've seen what can go wrong. I just had a cord prolapse with my delivery, which is less than, zero point zero 0.01 births. It's very rare. It doesn't happen often. My OBGYN, who's been in practice for many, many years, has only ever seen 2. It was the first cord prolapse he'd seen in 18 years. These things, but they happen. And when they happen, they're catastrophic. And so they do operate with a different cap on. They're looking for the problems. They're watching for the thing that's going to go wrong, because if they don't identify and act on it in 30 seconds, that's the difference between life and death for my baby. And I can appreciate and I respect that ability so much to see the problem when there is a problem. However, when all you see is problems, when all you see, unicorns, you might sometimes say a horse is a unicorn. We talk about that in lactation consulting a lot as a lactation consultant. Most of the time it's a horse. It might be a zebra, but it's very rarely a unicorn. And so don't jump to that. Don't jump to that solution right away. Look at the most common problems first and work your way through. And really, our hospital system is meant to recognize unicorns. And when they are a unicorn, we need them to act.
I think that's beautifully said. Are there other ways that medical systems truly serve women well, and what are the other ways where
I think the medical system, we have this system that's set up with, hospital and clinic. We have the clinic, which is your everyday healthcare, keep you healthy. And then you have the hospital, which is your emergency room, your overnight stay, your surgeries. And we tend to kind of think of them as one, especially out in areas of like rural America where your hospital and your clinic really are one building. There's only one building. And so it all kind of bleeds together in your mind. Like you don't even think about the fact that I'm seeing my doctor in the clinic today instead of seeing them in a bed as a hospital patient. Where I think they do well is as hospitals. When you need them, that emergent care, we absolutely need someone who's trained, to do the surgery, to do the stitches, to do the thing that it requires a little more. Where I think maybe they fall short and maybe we need to outsource and look to other resources a little bit more is the clinical care, the proactive keeping people healthy. How do we keep people healthy? We don't see doctors with a lot of time in the clinical setting because in rural healthcare, which is where I'm at, which a large majority of our country does have rural healthcare, although it is decreasing. We can see that rural healthcare labor and delivery wards are closing at an astonishing rate across the country in rural areas, creating these maternal health deserts. But when we do have it, our doctors are in the hospital and in the clinic at the same time on the same day. And so it's very frequent, actually, where your doctor will have to close clinic because they had to run over to the hospital, to do this emergency C-section or this delivery. And all their clinic patients either get canceled or rescheduled, or they sit and wait for 3 hours. That's not a great system. So what ends up happening, they come back to the clinic and your 14-minute appointment is now a 7-minute appointment because they're trying to get back on schedule. And so where we really need to improve in our healthcare delivery, especially to women, the education piece that happens in the clinic, that proactive, let's keep you healthy. There isn't a problem yet, but let's take time to make sure that we're not missing a problem or that we're allowing a problem to form.
Mhm. I liked your story about that nurse in the hospital who observed your natural birth and was just really amazed by it and moved by it. Do you think that birth has shifted from a natural process to something that's primarily managed? And what are the consequences of that shift?
I think in the hospital setting, it absolutely has shifted to a managed process. It's been put on a timeline. We mentioned earlier, if your water has broken, you've got 24 hours to deliver because some study indicated that maybe there was an increased risk, of infection. There are a lot of policies that govern hospital birth practice that make it unable to allow it to unfold at its normal rate for some women. I think we know it's these increased interventions. It's putting women on a timeline. It's saying you've got to get this baby out. We've got to do this on our timeline. I don't think I'm not as I read a lot of birth advocates and people that are maybe opposed to hospital birth that are saying things like, oh, they're just trying to empty the bed. They've got it's a business. They're trying to get you through as quick as possible. I don't tend to think that poorly of the hospital system, but I do think that when you see a number of deliveries that it does become sort of an industrial process. You are just produce the healthy baby, run all the tests, do the thing, get them out the door, check on to the next one. And
Mm.
you fail to recognize that this is one of the most sacred moments in this individual woman's life. It's the birth of her baby. This is a big deal to her. There's a desensitization that can happen when you're doing birth over and over again at a fast rate. And I think, unfortunately, we see that in some of our hospitals.
Yeah, I think that's a key point there. And how does the fear of liability shape the way a birth is handled in hospitals?
I think liability is a huge fear for every hospital administrator, but also for our practitioners. OBGYNs, their malpractice insurance has something called tail coverage. And this kind of works against what you would instinctually think, but the longer that an OBGYN is in practice, the more expensive their tail becomes, meaning that the more deliveries they've done, they need more insurance because people can come after them and sue them years after a delivery for a birth complication, for a birth injury. And that seems to go a little bit against what you would think. You would think that a more experienced physician, somebody who's been doing this a long time with good outcomes, that they would be less difficult to insure. But as soon as there is a claim, it just skyrockets. But it increases no matter what, even if they haven't had a claim, just the number of deliveries they're doing. Their insurance is getting more complicated, more expensive. There's fear. There's definite fear of being sued, definite fear of being put out of business because something goes wrong. And so they try to manage and prevent anything from going wrong.
Mhm. Now that we looked at how a modern hospital birth operates, let's talk a little bit about birth centers and alternatives. You're a strong advocate for birth centers. What exactly are they, and how do they differ from hospitals?
Birth centers are accredited, licensed healthcare facilities that exist outside of the hospital setting typically. Although some hospitals do have what they call a birth center on site. Usually they are run under a different framework of obstetrical care. A hospital in the United States is almost always a more allopathic, more OBGYN is a typical provider in that setting. Whereas a birth center is run under the midwifery model of care. And the midwifery model of care differs dramatically in that its basic premise is that birth is a natural physiological process that left alone and supported naturally, that you will have positive outcomes the vast majority of the time.
Mhm. So, who is a good candidate for a birth center and who isn't?
Low risk pregnancies are good candidates for birth centers, which I kind of laugh a little bit because I was this last pregnancy of mine, number eight, 44 years old. I'm like, am I even a candidate for a birth center birth anymore? I don't even know. And we were laughing about it. I was talking to my midwife and she's like, oh, you totally are a good candidate. Your health is fine. Things are fine. But I was like, I think I might be a little borderline. I'm not actually sure. Like there are some potentially risky things as you get older. And so a birth center is a good candidate for a woman who is in good health. There are no pre existing medical conditions, there are no signs of problems in the pregnancy. The goal of a good birth center, in my opinion, as somebody who's we're owning and operating birth centers through Guiding Star Project, the goal with screening patients on the front side of delivery is to eliminate and move out of care as many women that could potentially have problems as possible. We don't want them in care with us any longer than they should be if it's clear there could be a problem. And so that's a responsible birth center. They're saying, this is beyond our scope. We think there might be something that needs a closer attention to.
So, what are the characteristics of a woman who is not a good candidate for a birth center?
Yeah, it's things like health in general, but it could be things like a high BMI, blood pressure issues, history of preeclampsia, history of hemorrhaging. It could be multiple C-sections, might be a problem depending on how those deliveries went. Just really anything that indicates that she would struggle for this baby to be delivered. And it could be not just physical, it could just be psychological. Sometimes we think that a birth center is going to deliver this beautiful experience for us and we want it emotionally, but maybe psychologically there's past trauma, there's past fear, there's something that when it comes to pain, we don't have the ability to trust and to tolerate. And that is a piece of this. There is a deep trust that has to be present in a birth center because we don't have the OR down the hallway. A good birth center is going to be close to an emergency room, close to an OR with transfer. Most licensing requirements in states require a very short transfer, usually under 10 minutes. But, in my case, 10 minutes would have been too long. And that's a reality when you have a true crisis, a true emergency. You want to be in the right place. So,
So, speaking of that, critics often say that birth centers are risky. How do you respond to that?
well, I think birth is risky if you want to equate something natural with risk. There's a risk every day in life. A birth center has statistically been proven to be a safe, viable option for the majority of women. The vast majority of women are going to have very good outcomes in a birth center. So I think I just invite them to look a little bit closer at the statistics and actually look at the majority of birth outcomes in birth centers. C-section rates are much lower, like we mentioned earlier, 5 to 10%. Most are even lower. Very few maternal deaths happen in birth centers. And a lot of that, in large part, is due to correct filtering and screening of patients. It is a healthier population in general that's delivering in a birth center. So maybe the risk that they're perceiving is from someone who shouldn't have been there in the first place, perhaps.
Mhm. And what outcomes, physical, emotional, relational, do you see differently in birth center settings?
In birth centers, you see a much quicker recovery and return to home. That's something that surprises a lot of people. After a birth center delivery, you don't stay for 2 or 3 days. You're usually home within 6 hours of the delivery, and sometimes as short as 4 hours potentially. You are allowed to go back into your home much more quickly, which some women love, some women hate, depends upon your experiences. But you see women who are given the authority of their motherhood immediately. Sometimes in hospitals, it's kind of a disorienting experience because, especially for a first time mom where the baby's taken off to the nursery and someone else is taking care of them all night long, they're changing their diapers and giving them their first baths and they're doing everything kind of for you. And then at the end of your stay, they hand you a baby and say, "Good luck. You're on your own now." And you're like, "Wait, what?" Like, I don't even
Mhm.
know what I'm doing. You're letting me leave with this baby. Versus in a birth center, babies are roomed in the entire time. They're never really taken from mom. They're given to mom right away. She keeps her baby with her. And as help is needed, she's supported and helped. But really, that authority of you are this child's mother is bestowed immediately. There's no question about who's in charge and who this baby belongs to in a birth
Mhm.
center.
And what role do midwives play that is fundamentally different from OB care?
Like I mentioned, midwives are there to support the natural physiological process of birth. They are experts in delivering normal babies, whereas an OBGYN is an expert in delivering a pregnancy, a baby, a woman who's in a high risk or a difficult situation. So they're really meant for completely different instances of birth.
And you mentioned that some birth centers are located within hospitals. For those who might be scared of just being off site from a hospital, can we have the best of both worlds with birth centers and midwives within hospitals in case urgent care is needed?
I think we can. I really think we can. But what's going to be required for that to happen is these two frameworks to meld together. We've got this midwifery model of care, and then we've got this obstetrical model of care. And that's often the biggest clash that we see when a woman is transferred from a birth center into a hospital setting. There's sometimes, depending on the area of the country that you're in, depending on the relationships in that community between the providers, there sometimes is a little bit of a disrespect or I'm not willing to work with you or you're not allowed to follow your patient into the delivery room. And that's really when I get sad and I get upset about when I see that. When you have a midwife who's been with a woman for 40 weeks of pregnancy, has been caring for her, has been beside her, has helped her to come to the decision that it's time to transfer. You need a different level of care than I can provide. That's a very responsible decision that a midwife is making for the best interest of her patient. And then for her to be met at the hospital with any sort of hostility is very unprofessional. And that needs to.
Mhm. Now let's pivot to holistic feminism and what this vision for womanhood really entails. And you talk about empowering women to be fearlessly female. You call this holistic feminism. What does that mean, and how is it different from mainstream feminism?
Uh, I think holistic feminism is probably very different from what most people perceive mainstream feminism. And maybe the word feminism is even sort of a shock and it might even be inaccurate. I'm not entirely sure. I think there's a lot of debate right now about the use of the word feminism, but what holistic feminism is, the word to focus on there is holism. And I mentioned this earlier. We're seeing it in healthcare, that fragmentation of a woman's care. I think when it comes to feminism and female identity in general, we've seen a fragmentation of who I am as a woman. We've completely separated our mind and our body and our spirit, and we pretend like they're inconsequential, that they don't need to mesh. That my mind says this, my body says this, but it doesn't really matter because I've created myself. And a holistic feminism absolutely rejects that idea. It says our body is a guidepost to our identity and that our physical female abilities are going to give us a lot of information about what it means to be happy, what brings us happiness in this world.
Mhm. And you've argued that modern feminism promised empowerment, but may have disconnected women from their bodies. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think just looking at, the second wave of the feminist movement and in particular its embrace of contraception, abortion, suppression of ourself, our very self. Like I mentioned that we have had this dualism of the mind and the body. I'm talking to a bioethicist here. You know this better than anyone, the metaphysical realities of the human person. But as soon as we separate our body from ourself, when we say, I'm not my body, that has profound implications on my identity of who I am. And so I really root my version of feminism, my holistic feminist idea in the physical body. And I think women's healthcare is the vehicle to fix it, which second wave feminism had a disastrous effect on women's healthcare.
Mhm. And I think that what you had mentioned earlier, which is when fertility is seen as a disease as opposed to a sign of health, that this is a big issue and a big shift in a mindset about women's healthcare in general. So, how has the cultural messaging around control, independence, and autonomy shaped how women approach fertility, pregnancy, and birth?
Gosh, that's such a great question, Arena, because you're hitting all those buzzwords of, the feminist movement, like my body, my choice, like my decision, my independence, my everything. And we've made our body the enemy in that situation. We've made the inability to control something a sign of weakness when really that's entirely incorrect. It's that beautiful surrender. It's that working alongside, working with my body that really truly is what makes me most myself. I become fully myself when I am my body, when I am me, because I am my body. We are our bodies. They are us. So feminism, in this version of it, this grasping for control, this false idea that when I control it, I become more myself is the exact opposite of reality.
Mhm. And is there a tension between equality and embodiment, between being the same as men, quote unquote, and being distinctly female?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I still use the word feminism because the promotion of the distinctly female, I like to believe that's what feminism has always wanted to do is really focus on what makes us so unique and special and woman. We are very different from men.
Hmm.
Our reproductive systems make us incredibly different, very vulnerable in many ways, much more vulnerable in some ways than men. And we have to embrace and recognize that and promote the things that keep us healthy and safe.
And I think that part of the issue in the modern psychology is that women are trying to be like men instead of being women, right? Like we have this feminine genius, as Pope John Paul II said, and the men have masculine genius, and we can't forget that. But that we are very different, but we have different giftings, and that we can't put that aside, and that there's beauty and there's that's specific to being female and being male that I think is also been forgotten. So, what does it look like to honor both women's dignity and the reality of their biology?
I think recognizing our biology is a really important starting point. So I said it earlier, the body serves as a guidepost to identity. And I want to just go back a little bit more into that, like the anchor of our identity is our body, because as women, what it tells us when we just observe the body and we watch it carefully and closely is there's a receptivity in our body. There is a nourishment. There's a protection in our body. There is a care. What our body does, what it says, has the ability to teach us very profound spiritual truths about our identity and about our dignity, that our unique contribution to the world in many ways can be taught to us through our bodies. So, honoring the reality of our biology, honoring our fertility, honoring our motherhood, honoring the very shape of how our bodies work with men's bodies gives so much dignity to women. It gives so much purpose to our lives.
Beautifully said. And let's turn now to the modern view of women and sexuality. Do you think that our culture views the female body as something to trust or something to manage and control?
I mean, we absolutely do not trust women's bodies ever. And I find this fascinating. I've seen this slogan a few different times coming from maybe the pro choice sort of lobby. I've seen this trust women. They'll say, trust women, trust women. And I think the more accurate or better slogan is trust women's bodies. Trust our bodies. Like, trust them to do what they're supposed to do. Trust them to, if they get pregnant, that's a sign of health. Trust them to be able to give birth if they go into labor. Trust them to be able to breastfeed if they start to lactate, because our bodies sort of lead the way. And then we try to get on top of it and control it and shut it down. Um, so, I mean, trusting our bodies would lead to an entirely different way of viewing women's empowerment. But we
Mhm.
don't. We just trust women, but we don't trust women's bodies at all.
And how does this mindset show up not just in birth, but in contraception, fertility treatments, and reproductive health more broadly?
It's that grasping again to control it, to shut it down, to I know what's best. I'm going to control this. I'm going to make it fit with my schedule, with my life circumstances. It's a mindset that the body is disposable. to be treated however I want it to be treated. And that's so incredibly disrespectful to ourselves.
And I think you made this point earlier, and it was very important that, for example, a young girl gets put on the birth control, and then later on she realizes, well, now I'm having more difficulty getting pregnant when I want to, just because I shut off my body as a teenager, and maybe thought there was no consequence to that. I mean, I've met women who came off the birth control because they got blood clots. I mean, their lives were threatened, right? And their health was threatened by it. But to think that the decisions we make about our body aren't going to affect us in the future, right? And unfortunately, women who've had abortions, there might be scarring, etc., that will affect their fertility later. So the idea that we can turn something on, turn it off, instead of respecting the how God created us and the fertility he gave us, and working with that as opposed to trying to control it, right? What has been your experience in talking with women who've kind of experienced different versions of this, either in their own lives or in the lives of their sisters, their mothers, etc.?
Well, I was so glad you used that sort of image of switch it on, switch it off. Like you see that a lot, that women just sort of think, well, now it's time to have a baby. I'm 31 and I have my job and I'm married and I have my house and now I'm going to switch that on. And it doesn't work. We don't actually have complete control over our bodies. And so there tends to be a lot of surprise. What I've experienced and what I've seen in working with women is they're shocked that it didn't go the way they thought it would go. Breastfeeding in particular is one where there is a lot of shock and a lot of confusion of that didn't go how I thought it would go. I was just thinking that now I would breastfeed. There is a surrender, there is a cooperation, but really what it comes from is a deep respect for your body, for yourself. It's a deep respect of, I'm going to care for you. I'm going to care for me. I'm going to care for me in the best way so that I can work with me, be gentle with me and not be at war with me. We tend to war with our bodies. We tend to try to pound them into submission and make them do things for us. When if we're just gentle and we listen, it goes much better.
So, what would it look like to rebuild a culture that actually trusts women's bodies?
That's wild. I mean, think about a true feminist culture in the sense of that's our framework of we think women's bodies are perfect the way they are. We're not going to alter, suppress, or mess with them. I mean, that's wild to think about that for a moment, Maria, that contraception becomes completely unthinkable. It becomes a violence against women in a sense. Abortion, what in the world? You would never consider that because what her body has created is good. It's beautiful. You would never question it. A culture that actually trusts women's bodies and doesn't suspect them and doesn't shame them and doesn't blame them becomes a place where motherhood is not feared. It becomes a place where women, in a sense, and are revered for our life-giving capacity. You can't use a woman who is, has the potential to hold and create life. If that's what's instilled in our boys, if that's what's instilled in our culture, that every woman has the potential to create and bring forth new life, there is a whole different world in front of us.
Mm.
And that's the feminism that I desire to see. And that's, the feminism, the new feminism, the holistic feminism. I think that's what we really are working for.
And that's a vision to strive for, and I love that vision too. So, is control the wrong goal when it comes to women's health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our modern version of control, there are some things that we should try to control in a sense, like work with our body. We should try to control our blood pressure in the sense of keep it healthy. We should try to control our weight, maybe. Those are things that are healthy to keep an eye on. But when it comes to, I'm going to reverse healthy functions of this body to have an outcome that I want, just to be in control of some aspect of my life, that's the absolute wrong goal. Our life goals need to take into account first the realities of our body, and we need to shift. We need, that's why babies are so enlightening for so many of us. And we find that we have completely different life goals after we have children because our body's reality, when it's speaking to us, we no longer, maybe want to have that exciting career where we're traveling around the country because we're toting a breastfeeding baby along. Like if we let our bodies and what they're doing actually guide our decisions instead of the other way around, we make different decisions.
Mhm. Let's talk a little bit about your new role. You stepped into a new
Mhm.
role at the University of St. Thomas as project manager of the Sexuality and Gender Studies program. How is this program different from what students typically encounter in this space?
I think any women in gender studies, sexuality, and gender studies program sort of raises red flags for some people or raises an assumption of what the program is about. It's usually deeply tied with sort of this controlling second wave feminist idea of women's bodies and women are can do anything men can do, and it's this feminist sort of mindset. That's what a lot of us just assume it to be, and really that's why this program is exciting to me, and that's why my role in this program I think has been a unique pick, just having a history and a background in women's healthcare and being such a strong advocate for surrender and cooperation with our bodies. Because what it leads to is an entirely different kind of feminism, an entirely different study of our sexuality, of our gender. And I'm loving being in this space, but I think it's entirely different than what anyone would expect a women in gender studies program to be. It's not even the same category in a sense.
Yeah, it's not even the same universe, but I think that it aligns very well with everything you've been doing along the way, which is you're focusing on women's health. On I don't even like to call it gender, as many of you might know, that gender is a word that was used for nouns and pronouns, in different languages and Romance languages, etc. So I like to reclaim the right take on understanding sexuality, human sexuality, what it's for, what it means to be female, what it means to be male. And I know that this is all part of what the program's doing. So, what vision are you bringing into the program, and what do you want students to walk away understanding about the human person, sexuality, and the body?
I don't think I'm bringing any unique vision. Like I'm so grateful to be at the University of St. Thomas because it's a faithful Catholic institution. It's one of the Newman Guide schools, having agreed to the Ex Corde document saying that it is faithful to the teachings of the Catholic Church and the magisterium. And so the vision really that this program is bringing forward is based deeply on John Paul II's theology of the body. It's that understanding of sex being beautiful and good, the good news about sex and marriage, to refer to an older a book on the topic, but we're bringing forward sexuality in the right framework of marriage and its right purpose of family and reproduction, looking at the role of the body in that and identity and human flourishing and happiness. So this program, in many ways is studying how secular approaches have hurt the family, how it has hurt the human being, how we've gotten it wrong. We're talking a lot about how we've gotten it wrong. And we're looking at the reality of the world around us. The program is housed at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at the University of St. Thomas. And really, the goal of the Nesty Center is that intersection of faith and culture. Where does our faith inform where our culture should go? And I can't think of another area that is needing the faith more right now than human identity and sexuality in many ways. So the vision we're bringing is a faithfully Catholic vision of good news.
And it's much needed because everything around us is telling us a different message about the human body, about our maleness or femaleness, and this is actually revealing the reality of who we are and what our gifts are, and that these are gifts. Our fertility is a gift, etc. Going now back to talking about the Guiding Star Project, you mentioned I love the vision you presented, which is a 9-year-old walks in and she's getting educated, and you walk with her throughout her whole life, in all the phases of her life. Uh, can you break that out a little bit more and tell us what a truly integrated model of women's healthcare would look like in practice? Because obviously, you're not just critiquing a current system; you're building something new, and you're building what you would the rest of the country and the rest of the world would look like in terms of women's healthcare.
Yeah. And when we first began this work, roughly 15 years ago, we saw Guiding Star as a place where we could pull together the best of the community resources, that maybe these resources already exist in the community. We're just going to kind of pull them together and put them into one building. And the people that we were pulling together were fertility care practitioners, lactation consultants, midwives, doulas, even sometimes chiropractors, therapists, physical therapists, pelvic floor specialists. We were pulling together people that really served the broad sort of scope of what women need to feel healthy and to feel really good about themselves. As time has gone on, we've shifted a little bit more into the actual delivery of the babies into a birth center. We found that a birth center is actually a really viable, good way to deliver all of those services to a woman in a licensed healthcare facility setting. We initially thought like we're just going to kind of create like this women's health co-op and that'll be good enough. But we found that in order for us to really cohesively deliver the services, bouncing them across the hallway, to other providers and then bouncing them over to a hospital for the delivery just wasn't getting the job done the way we wanted to get it done. We have noticed that many women need their care to be integrated both philosophically, that you're not getting a bunch of different advice from people, but also geographically. It's very helpful when you can go to one location that has a drop-in child watch that you can check your kids in, that you can go and meet with your fertility care practitioner, or you can go and meet with your midwife, or you can go and meet with your lactation consultant, that everybody is sort of working in one space together, that becomes your place that you go for everything you need. That has become very evident. And that's my experience as a mom. I'm going to go someplace where my kids are welcome, that I know they're safe, that I don't have to line up childcare. That's a huge one for me. But also where I can go and see multiple providers at once seamlessly. That's another big one for me. So that's really the integrated model of women's healthcare that we want to see. It's also her place where she goes when she needs just support. Our centers also have the drop-in child watch available for really, quite frankly, almost like a crisis nursery for 2 hours at a time. If you are having a bad day, you're having a day, where you just need to go take a nap. Our lactation rooms can double as napping spaces. Our, empty exam room can double as your mental health holiday space. We need that. We need those safe spaces for moms in our communities. And that's what it really looks like to be integrated. It's not just that physical care for women. It's that I see you type care. I see you in your struggle right now and you're okay. You're okay. We're here with you. We're going to make sure you're okay.
I think that's so beautiful. So how many centers do you have, and what's your goal for growing them out even more? Because we definitely need them, not only in
Yeah.
the US, but internationally.
We do need them. So we have 2 licensed birth centers currently that are up and operational that can do the deliveries, and that's in Tampa, Florida, and El Paso, Texas. And then we have 5 additional locations that serve women without delivering their babies. And so, like I said, when we began this, we kind of began this co-op model. And so we do have 5 locations that still are operating a little bit under that, where we have allied providers joining together in spaces to meet women's needs. And 3 of them are in Iowa and 2 of them are in Minnesota. So we're kind of all over the country right now. But I think where we're going and where we want to go is really into the birth center space because, like I mentioned just briefly earlier, we're seeing labor and delivery wards close at an alarming rate across the country, and it's increasing these maternal health deserts for women. So we got to step into that gap. If we're asking women to be open to life, to have babies, which we are, we're asking women to be open to life. We have to make birth safe and accessible for them.
And also just the idea that birth itself is a natural process, and to help women understand and embrace the fact that for the most part, it doesn't need to become a managed process. It's just a natural process, and you just have to go along with it.
Yep.
What your body's doing is a good thing, and your body knows what to do in general. We're
Yeah.
talking, as you mentioned, the unicorns. There's situations that need more care, that need more support, but for the most part, helping women to see and empowering them to see that your body knows what to do. You just have to get prepared for it, essentially, and go along with it, right? The surrender part. I think that's super important. Your model emphasizes fertility awareness, restorative reproductive medicine, and we've talked about restorative reproductive medicine on the show, and honoring the body's design. Why are those pieces so often missing from mainstream women's healthcare?
Gosh, I've actually thought a lot about this and I've talked with, restorative reproductive medicine doctors and people that really focus on that model of care. Like, why isn't this the norm? Why don't we do this? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do think there is something to do with our insurance model. I do think there's something to do with money. I think that there isn't a lot of money in the body being healthy and doing what it naturally does, unfortunately. You look at a fertility care provider and what they make teaching women about their cycles, then you look at an IVF doctor and what they make. So I mean, there's this massive disparity that might have financial motivations potentially. I think we've just gotten so used to the idea of control being good that we don't even want to think about what it looks like to let go of it.
Hmm. So, for a woman listening who is pregnant or hopes to be, what questions should be she be asking her doctor or midwife?
The questions that she should be asking of her doctor or her midwife. I think it's an interview process. You don't have to work with the doctor that they assigned you to when you made your first prenatal appointment. If you're going in there and you're getting a sense of they're going to just tell me what to do and they're not going to listen to me, and I don't actually have a voice here. I mean, those are massive, massive red flags. The kinds of questions, that I like to ask are, what are your thoughts about if this situation occurs? So one of them was, I'm older. Are you going to let me go to 40 weeks? Because it's a standard hospital policy. I think ACOG maybe is behind this one a little bit, saying that 39-week inductions are the standard for women over a certain age. And just asking my doctor, like, will you work with me on that? I don't want to be induced at 39 weeks. I don't think that's a good idea based on my history of inductions that have failed. It's not a great idea. And him saying, yeah, well, we can monitor you a little more closely and watch. I needed to see that sort of flexibility and that openness from him to know that I would be heard. So that those are really the thing. Ask questions to see if you're heard.
Mm. And to your point, what are some other red flags in a birth plan or care team for a woman or couple going? And as you said, it's an interview process. So, what should they be looking for? Obviously, I love that you say, "Are you being heard by that team?" But are there more specific things they could be asking?
I mean, I think if you're able to do a little behind the scenes investigation, I would look for things like C-section rates. If you are seeing a provider that's got a 60% C-section rate, I would probably put the brakes a little bit and say, what's going on here? Unless you're in a high risk situation, I would say that's probably not an appropriate provider for you to be working with. They obviously are specialized in something that you are hoping is not your outcome. Other red flags in general of systems are when you see things like birth plans not accepted here. That's been an interesting one. I've actually seen a rise in that recently where hospitals will actually say birth plans are not accepted here. Like, and they'll try to position it in such a way of saying like birth is unexpected and a wild ride and we don't know what's going to happen. So we don't want you to get attached to any outcome because it might not happen. Like they'll try to kind of position it that way, but really what they're saying is we don't care what you want. We don't care that you want to wear your own slippers and your own pajamas and whatever. You're going to wear our gown and you're going to stay in bed and you're going to keep your feet up. And so those are red flags. Those are red flags that your birth choice, that your kind of autonomy as a laboring woman could be challenged.
That's crazy to think of. It's like you're the patient, you're the customer in a sense, in a financial sense to the hospital. So we always say the customer is always right. So if a mom and a dad walk in there wanting a specific plan, even if it doesn't happen that way, that should be honored, right? Like they are the parents and and they want to have a I don't know, peaceful birth, etc. As you said, maybe they want to wear comfortable clothing or have a certain setting, and so that they can create that peaceful space for themselves and for their child coming into the world. And so where has medicine gone where those desires, and those are good desires, right, of the parents or of the mom to just kind of be sideline for just the process of, all right, like as you mentioned, like it's almost like a conveyor belt. All right, let's get you delivered onto the next one, right? I
Well,
think that
and sorry, really to just continue on this just one step further though, because there are some really serious bioethical implications right now on this point, because I think there is a danger. There's a danger for well meaning people to overemphasize the safety of the baby at the expense of the mother's well being. And so that's a really careful line that we have to walk to understand that is this mother in her right mind? Is she educated to a point where she's going to make the right call for her baby? Do we trust her to make the right call for her baby? Or is she so, you know, obsessed with her twinkle light water birth that she's not paying attention to what we're saying is happening with her baby? And so there is that. And I really come back to education, 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 education. Like that is just so critical prior to the birth, that we're educating really on health outcomes and the physiological process, and not just looking at the Instagram aesthetic of what's the birth. The birth you want is a healthy, safe birth. The outcome you want is a healthy, safe mom, baby, not traumatic. The lighting might not matter, to get that outcome. And so it's just this education piece is so important. But I mention this because it is incredibly important that we don't completely discount mom's wishes, because that matters to her. It creates her safety. It creates her ability to birth this baby naturally. But there's a baby as well. There's two people. There's always two people in a birth situation. But a really traumatized, unhappy, sad mother, depressed, postpartum psychosis mother does not care well for a baby. And so both matter. Both matter.
Absolutely. So, what kind of preparation, what classes do you recommend? What nonprofits do you recommend, not only for preparation for birth, but also for preparation for breastfeeding? Also, obviously, education, fertility education beforehand, etc. What are your go tos?
I mean, I'm a little biased. I'm going to say guiding star because that's what we do all the time. I tend to find your best partners are actually your local people that you know one on one, that you have philosophically vetted, that you know them. It's hard to give names of big organizations, big nonprofits, because there's a lot of shifts that happen in leadership at times. And so some of the best breastfeeding people I would have said 2 decades ago, I would absolutely not advocate for any longer. And so I think it's looking for the local people that you know are philosophically aligned with you is incredibly important for education. And just read and watch and just see birth as much as you can. Just be open to watching and receiving a number of different birth stories, not just the good ones, sometimes the bad ones. Listen to other women. I think women have always been each other's best educators and advocates of sharing what they've experienced, what they've gone through, and believe them and trust them.
hmm And speaking of, not all birth experiences are happy and easy. Most of them, obviously, birth is not easy to begin with, but some are traumatic. So, if someone has had a traumatic birth experience, what do you want her to know?
And that's what I'm still sitting in. I'm still sitting in the aftermath of a very traumatic birth, 4 months ago myself. But what I want her to know um, is you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. Oftentimes you do surrender to a system that may not treat you well, may not give you the outcome you want, may have scared you, but you didn't do anything wrong. Um,
Mhm.
so that's really just what I want her to know. And that healing does come, I think, with time, and that you can proactively do things to help with your healing. Our bodies are very resilient. Our babies are very resilient. Our minds, our hearts are very resilient. Like there's always redemption, there's always healing available. So nothing is completely broken ever.
Mhm. And what has that looked like for you, especially in the last 4 months coming out of this?
It was writing my birth story, getting it out there, sharing it with people, getting that feedback, just surrounding myself with people that allowed me to talk about it honestly and to put words to it has been incredibly important, being open with it. Also, finding a great pelvic floor physical therapist, finding somebody who knows how to do C-section scar massage, going and getting massages for my shoulders, just being gentle and being present in my body and recognizing it is changed. It is there is a scar that will never go away. It's there now. I'm still me. Like, I'm still me though, So it is just that, like, I care for myself, which allows me to care for my baby as well. It's not just
Mhm.
about the healthy baby. And that's tempting to just be like, well, she's okay. She's all right. She's doing okay. That's all I'm going to think about. That's all I'm going to focus on. How I'm doing doesn't matter. And I think we do that a lot, especially moms with babies in the NICU, especially moms with babies with negative outcomes. You ask them, "Are you okay?" And they don't even know how to answer, because the answer is my baby okay? If my baby's okay, then I'm okay. But there is this radical possibility that your baby might not be okay, but you still can be okay. Like there still is the ability for you to be okay and healed. Not easy, but take care of yourself so that you are able to pour out and care for this other person.
Yes, and on the flip side, your baby might be okay, but you're not okay. And that's where you're saying You need to make sure you get the things that you need to be okay, whether that's counseling or whether that's the therapy, pelvic floor therapy, whatever you might need, so that you can be present to your child, to your children, to your family. And again, it's two people. We have to make sure that we're addressing the needs of both the mom and the child and the family. So I think that that's part of the integration, right? The process, and it's also about not just is your body okay, but is your mind, are your emotions okay? It's the integrated whole, right?
Yeah. And we refer to the mother and the baby in the breastfeeding world, we refer to them as the dyad. The breastfeeding mother and child is seen as one unit in a sense. And so we don't just look at the baby and say, okay, they're gaining weight, they're pooping, they look fine. We're also looking at, is mom sleeping? She looks like she's a wreck. Like, what is happening here? Like, we wouldn't say that the dyad is well if one is clearly not. And we need to think that way about women and their babies, that it has to be protected, they have to be cared for together. Um, yeah, because the overall health, it's
Mhm.
dependent upon both of them being
Mhm.
well.
So, what's one thing every woman should understand about her body that she likely hasn't been told?
That you are your body. I think it's actually, it's not like a biological body thing. It's more of an identity, metaphysical reality of who you are as a person. You are your body, and you are good. Your body is good. You are good. And when we start to stop suppressing our bodies, we also start to let our true selves come forward a little bit, like our own unique gifts, our unique parts of ourselves start to come out. So it's actually not a point about your body or about your fertility or about one of those little like, "Oh, one thing you don't know about your body." Like, it's not one of those little gotcha type things, like quick answers. It's simply, you actually are your body. Like, that's you. Take care of you.
Yeah, and that this is about your identity, that your existence is good, and so it actually goes a lot deeper than that. So, if we get this right, if we rethink how we approach women's bodies, fertility, and birth, what changes?
Like I said before, like, everything changes. Like, imagine a world where it's the norm, where we're not suppressing women's bodies, where it's actually sort of seen as a violence or like a, anti-feminism or misogyny. Like, imagine if it was misogynistic to put a little girl on birth control. Wouldn't that just be wild if we actually had that as our framework? If we get it right and we get women's healthcare right, the trickle effects, the outward ripple that this causes changes everything
Mhm.
of how we view everything about women.
And if we don't, what's at stake? If we stay where we're at or get worse?
Yep. I think that's exactly right. I think if we don't make this change, I do think it is women's healthcare, I think, is probably the most effective vehicle to do this change because of all the ways that women's healthcare is sort of protected and elevated and given this status of authority. I think women's healthcare is our best vehicle to make this massive cultural change, to tell women the truth about themselves, to reverse these negative trends of suppressing and altering and changing our very selves. I think we can do it through women's healthcare. I know there's a lot of efforts to do it legally and through academia and through religious work. Like, I think there's a lot of efforts that are underway. But if we look at how it fell in the first place, it was women's healthcare. Women's healthcare has
Mhm.
started to lie to us in a sense about who we are and what our bodies are and whether they're good or whether they're dangerous and whether it's healthy or whether it's bad, to be fertile. If we don't attack it from the women's healthcare position, we're going to see this further fragmentation. We're going to see the body reduced to just a canvas that we write on and create however we want and destroy. And ultimately, we destroy who we are.
Mm. So powerfully said. Lastly, what does true empowerment for women
Mm.
actually look like?
I think it's unique for every woman what her end goal is going to look like what her end empowered woman looks like. I don't think there's a caricature of the empowered woman. I think she looks very different. But the characteristics of the empowered woman is a woman at peace with her body, at peace with herself and with the world. She's a peaceful person. Sometimes we think of empowerment as like raging sort of power, like I'm angry and I have a voice and I'm using my voice. And an empowered woman could do that, but it needs to come from a place of peace, a place of good. I don't need to change myself to fit someone else's expectation. I don't need to alter. We think the power to alter, the power to control, that's all false. That's all a lie. That's all, just, it doesn't work that way. Like a truly empowered woman is a woman who knows she doesn't have to change anything for anyone. Like I don't have to change anything about myself because I'm good.
Mm. And I think that this mindset shift on women's healthcare and one surrendering, accepting your identity as a woman and embracing fertility, embracing all of these things that are actually part of our bodily existence is a really important mindset shift. And your vision for women's healthcare is truly inspiring. I want these centers to be all over the world. I think that that's what women deserve, and that's what families deserve. And I thank you for all the work that you do, Leah, and I really appreciate you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
For my conversation with Leah Jacobson, founder of the Guiding Star Project and author of Wholistic Feminism, here are my 5 key takeaways about whether feminism fails women in birth. 1. Birth reveals the limits of control. Leah's most recent delivery, which almost wasn't a live birth, exposed a hard truth. Birth is not something we fully control. Despite modern medicine's promises, there are moments where the right response isn't more control, but surrender, whether to the natural process or to necessary medical intervention. 2. Women's healthcare is deeply fragmented, and it's failing women. Modern women's healthcare often treats fertility, pregnancy, and long-term health as disconnected issues. This fragmentation leads to short-term solutions, like prescribing birth control in adolescents, that can have unintended long-term consequences for fertility and overall health. 3. Holistic feminism reconnects women to their bodies. Leah argues that modern feminism has separated women from their own bodies, promoting control over cooperation. In contrast, holistic feminism sees the body as meaningful and integrated, not something to override, but something that reveals identity, purpose, and even happiness. 4. The medical system excels in crisis, but often overmanages normal, low-risk births. Hospitals are designed to handle emergencies, and when true complications arise, they save lives. But applying that same high intervention model to normal, low-risk births can lead to a cascade of interventions, increasing C-sections and negative outcomes. The challenge is knowing when intervention is necessary and when it isn't. 5. True empowerment is not control, it's peaceful integration. The episode reframes empowerment entirely. Rather than control, autonomy, or overriding biology, true empowerment is a woman who is at peace with her body, her fertility, and her identity, and knows that it is made good. Because truth matters and human dignity isn't optional. This is Bioethics, babe. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Bioethics Babe podcast. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and your favorite podcast platform, and share with your friends and family. Also check out bioethicsbabe.com for the latest episodes and resources.